Good afternoon. This is August 28th, 2019. This is wildlife biologist Eric Orff with the New Hampshire Fish and Wildlife YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the New Hampshire Fish and Wildlife YouTube channel, and appreciate that if you would. Well, I'm going to talk about the New Hampshire goose season, which starts on Sunday, September 1st. This next Sunday will begin the resident goose season here in New Hampshire. And resident geese were something that didn't occur here in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Actually, it was the early 90s that we seemed to find this influx of what we call resident geese, so they're not very migratory. There are other geese that have wintered on Great Bay for decades that come down out of Canada and stop here and winter here, a couple thousand of those some winters. But we have something like 40,000 what are called resident geese. They are the same species, Canada geese, but they are basically non-migratory. They will go as far south as they need to go to feed in the wintertime. And for during my career at the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, beginning in the early 90s, we began to ban and capture these resident geese and began learning about the habits. We actually put some big white neck collars on geese in the early 90s, and my job was to spot them and to detect them year-round to see where these geese were going. And the actual fact is, Nashua, New Hampshire is kind of the goose capital of the state. Whenever we did a goose census, and the regional wildlife biologists like me would go around to spot geese and count them, Nashua usually came out on top as to having the most geese. And why? Because these geese have learned that they can move into a pond around these office parks where people feed them. They love to eat the grass on golf courses, ball fields, parks. So they have learned to live amongst people, and of course that makes them not very vulnerable to the hunting season, which starts September 1st, this coming Sunday. But because many of these geese are considered nuisance, they can land on, say, a water source and kind of pollute that water source. So the Fish and Game Department has an annual early fall inland or non-resident resident goose season. It starts September 1st, and the bag limit is liberal, 5 a day. So you can kill 5 geese a day. And there's only around, I think, 4,000 or so waterfowl hunters in New Hampshire. Back in the 60s and 70s, there were as many as 10,000 duck hunters, waterfowl hunters, when there were no geese. But that number has dwindled to around 4,000, the last I knew a few years ago. So not a lot of hunters. The goose hunters are going to be hunting mostly fields. These geese, once the farmers begin to cut their corn in September, the geese will be feeding there. They'll feed on the fields, alfalfa fields and clover fields that are cut. I think over the years I've learned that a few golf courses invite the goose hunters in first thing in the morning to try to get rid of some of these pesky geese. They do make a mess over the golf courses all summer. So we've gone from a handful in the early 90s, maybe a few hundred of these resident Canada geese, to now I think it's more like 40,000, 30 or 40,000 resident geese that occur in New Hampshire. Again, higher numbers towards the central and southern part of the state, fewer numbers as you go to the north, but they certainly occur way up on the Connecticut riverside, up into Lancaster and up that way. So almost statewide there are resident Canada geese, and many of them. And this early September season is an attempt to try to control that number, reduce their nuisance factor. So we certainly need to welcome the goose hunters to try to trim back this goose herd. And thank you again for the farmers and landowners who own 90% of the land in New Hampshire, where our hunters, goose hunters and duck hunters, will be hunting this fall. So thank you very much. So we hope that the goose hunters are successful and can trim back some of this burgeoning population of resident geese in New Hampshire.